Tim VanLeeuwen with VanLeeuwen Garage, and today we're putting new struts on the 2005 Chevy Malibu Classic, or dubbed as the work car around here. This car is a high mileage car and it gets used and abused, and it's time to put new struts on the back of this car. So this is my high mileage work car slash farm car. I drive it a ton of miles to work and back, about 1,100 miles a week to be in fact. And we take it to the farm. I've hauled farm stuff in it numerous times, tools, and even hauled some hay bales in the back. So these rear struts are worn out. So I'm going to show you today how to replace those. First, we're going to start by taking this tire off. But before we do that, we got to jack it up a little bit. I like to put the jack right here under the car and use a wooden block. There's not too many points that you can jack from under here, but this is the easiest. There's a little area right underneath here. Use a 4x4 wooden block and a floor jack. As you can tell, I got a leaky connection. I got to get that fixed. So I got to hold my hand on here and run those lug nuts off at the same time. We'll get that fixed in a later episode. Now we've got two bolts here to take off, two nuts, and these are the two main bolts that's going to hold your strut onto the knuckle of the drum. Now we got two nuts here to take off. These are the two main bolts that's going to hold your strut to your knuckle for your wheel and your drum. So that's an 18mm socket. Just going to use my breakover bar. My impact's not cooperating right now. I'm going to use that to get it loose. Then I'm going to go back with my So I got it broke loose with the breakover bar. I'm going to go back and get a ratchet and finish taking them off. It'd help if you got the ratchet in the right direction. All right, we're not going to take it all the way loose. We're not going to take the nuts all the way off. We're going to leave those on because it's going to help us pound them out. So now we're going to go inside the car. We're going to use our 13mm socket. We got 3 bolts that holds the top of this strut on. We got this one with the nut on the inside. We're going to take that nut off from in here. These 2 bolts, this one and one more in the back, we have to take out from the underside of the car. So we'll get this broke loose a little bit. Doesn't take much to break it loose. And then you can thread the rest of it off. There you go. And the new strut comes with new hardware. It comes with new bolts and a nut for that. I told you guys we use this car for the farm. Look at all that hay from hay bales in here. So the other 2 bolts, you can see them. There's one bolt right there. There's another bolt back there. So you're going to need some extensions to get up in there. But I'm going to take those bolts out real quick. And then we'll focus on trying to get these lower bolts out. So before we take those top bolts out, we're going to try to pound these bolts out right here. And what you're going to do is you're going to take a socket. You're going to leave that nut on. You're going to put your socket on there. Take a mini sledge like this. Hopefully you guys can see all this. And we're going to pound these bolts out. This socket's going to, you got to reuse this hardware. So the socket's going to protect the nut. And you're going to protect the threads of the bolt and not ding these bolts up by, you know, trying to swing it in there and mess up the threads. Just like that. It's not going to get them all the way through, obviously. But it's going to get them started. Something I want to show you guys is that these bolts going through this strut right here are splined. See the splines in there? You want to pay attention to where the way these slots are lined up on these bolts, because I believe that these bolts are used for alignment. So you want to keep these the same if you can when you put these back in. So just remember about how they were. Take a picture of how they were. Maybe even mark them if you want. I'm going to take this car and get it aligned right after I get these struts on. So I'm just going to get them close. The alignment shop's going to do the rest. So I got these bolts broke loose. I'm just finishing backing them out now. That one bolt going up through the car is going to kind of hold the top of this strut in place. The other one's loose. I'm just taking it out by hand. Done. Now we can finish taking these nuts off. The hardest part is getting these nuts, these bolts, pounded out the first time, because you're kind of freeing up those splines out of the knuckle. Once you get the splines kind of freed up, they're easier to pound out. So take your little punch. Just like that. It doesn't take much after you get the bolts moving. Here's the bottom bolt. See all the splines? So we're gonna stick our punch in here. All right, there's our second bolt. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna try to separate these. And done. This is probably, I'm sure this is the factory strut, because my parents owned this car since it was almost new. So we're gonna get ready to put our new strut on. Here's our new strut from Monroe. It's a pretty good looking strut. It's a direct factory replacement. It's nothing fancy, but it'll work just fine for this car. So what we need to do is we need to guide this in there just like we took it out. There we go. I'm gonna guide it up in the hole. So we got that guided up in the hole, got that one bolt up through the hole in the car. We're gonna guide our two other bolts and get them started. There it is. Sometimes you lose stuff so easy on this gravel. We're gonna get this last bolt started. Get all your bolts started before you tighten anything down permanently. Again, I don't know how that got reversed, but it did somehow. There we go. All right. So now that we got those started, we're gonna go ahead and get our strut mount bolts back in. So these may be a little bit tricky to get lined back up. I gotta go get something smaller, a screwdriver or something. We need to try to get this screwdriver started in this hole. Then we're going to try to put this bolt in. You got to push on this however you have to get this hole lined up. Okay. That one started anyways. Okay. That one is in. Let's do our other one. So you don't have to get them pounded flush on this backside because we're going to suck them down and we're going to make sure they're sucked down and flush. But you need to get them in far enough that the splines will hold the bolt from spinning. Now I tried to find the torque specs on these bolts, and of course if you don't have the repair manual and trying to get answers off the internet is, you know, not very reliable from people, a lot of people in forums and stuff like that. So we're just gonna have to go the old school way and tighten these up by feel, get them nice and snug. And I mean, I really like to do things the right way, use torque specs. I don't like the half-ass stuff, but in this situation, when I can't find the torque specs and I'm not going to go buy a repair manual for this old car, I'm just going to snug these up good and tight and call it good. That wasn't the bolt, that was my ratchet that just slipped. Now, if I was doing this for somebody else, I would definitely find the torque specs. Because when you're doing work for somebody else, you're putting their life on the line. I'm confident in my ability to judge the torque and the tightness on these for, you know, the most part. And it's just going to be me driving it. You don't want to put somebody else's family in jeopardy because you're too lazy to look up the torque specs or buy a repair manual. If you're doing stuff for other people, you should be spending the money to buy some kind of software or manuals to know the torque specs. So those are tight. I've seen people run these on with impacts. You never know how tight them impacts are torquing stuff down. I mean, I've seen people multiple times torque stuff down and snap bolts and everything else. And I mean, you could be torquing those down way past what they're supposed to be. And it's just something I don't do. Almost everything I do, sometimes I can handle taking stuff off with an impact. That's kind of what it's for, really. I don't ever put stuff back together with an impact ever. You will never see me putting something back together with an impact. It's just something I don't do. Everything is hand torqued, hand wrenched or hand torqued by me. That's one thing that I'm a stickler about. It don't matter how old the car is or anything. It's just, I'm an aircraft mechanic. That's my career and that's my day job, and it's my job to do things right and torque things to the right specs and be a stickler about the details, because you're putting hundreds of people's lives in jeopardy when that plane goes up in the air. And by God, it better be right, because when it's not, if the plane goes down, hundreds of people die, and that's not something I want on my conscience. And so I follow the same methods on vehicles. Your family's riding in the vehicle, somebody else's family's riding in the vehicle. Things need to be done right, and if they're not done right, you don't need to be a mechanic. So, luckily, this is just my work car. I'm a pretty good judge. I know everybody says that, but I'm a pretty good judge of what the torque needs to be on these, how tight to tighten them, and it's going to be just fine for myself and this being a working farm car. Oh, God. Now you can see these two bolts sticking up through here. I'm going to go ahead and go under and tighten those up first. And only because these holes that it's going up through are a little bit tighter, you know. And this hole has got a little bit of play in it. So we're going to tighten these up first, make sure that strut's where it needs to be, and then tighten this one up. I'm going to make sure they're both snug first. Want to make sure everything's seated correctly and go ahead and snug it up. Again, if you're not confident in being able to judge how tight you're getting these bolts, get a repair manual with the torque specs and get a torque wrench, guys. Let's check this one more time. All right, I think that's good. I'm gonna go torque down the inside, that inside bolt up there, and this baby's done. So that about wraps this side up. I'm gonna go ahead and throw the tire and wheel back on it. You always want to do both sides when you replace a strut. Don't ever just do one side. It's really going to throw your alignment off, and it's going to wear your tires out because the two sides are different. One side will be taller. This strut's probably going to raise this car, since that old strut was factory original. It's probably going to raise this car 1 inch to 2 inches, probably closer to a full 2 inches. I'm going to show you what this car looks like after I get the tire back on it and set on the ground. When I started this video, this car was already jacked up in the air just a little bit, so it made this fender appear taller than it really is. But I'll get you a good view of what the car actually looks like with the new strut on it. This boot right here is gonna come down over this. Once this car lowers down, this spring and shock inside will compress, and that's gonna cover this up. Pretty nice looking strut, guys. We got our slots lined up about where they were before. This strut looks too good to be on this old of a car, but you know what? You gotta keep these things going. You gotta keep these old vehicles going. New vehicles cost too much. Most generally, these lug nuts will get torqued to 100 foot-pounds, so that's what we're going to torque them to. I got the car sitting back on the ground. I torqued these lug nuts to 100 foot-pounds, by the way. And I'm pretty happy with the ride height. It did raise the car a little bit. I apologize for the beginning of the video. I already had the car jacked up a little bit, so it's hard to tell in comparison the starting ride height and the finished ride height. But I do believe that it brought this car back to the factory ride height. And I think it really evens out the front and the back of the car really well. I'm not as concerned about the struts on front at this point. When you put stuff in the trunk, you know, it really weighs those struts down a lot. Especially all that weight hanging off the back end of the car there. And really just puts even more weight on those struts. So they were the weakest point on this suspension by far. And I'm happy with the way this turned out. Anybody can do this in their driveway. I obviously had to do it in my gravel driveway. Our garage is all full right now. But a little bit of time and patience and just getting out and doing it is the hard part, getting started. But we're done now, and the car looks good. I hope you guys enjoyed watching one of the very first episodes of VanLeeuwen Garage. Let me know in the comments what you think. And in future episodes, we're going to be bringing you more car stuff, trucks, diesels, and you guessed it, even hot rods. So stay tuned, and thank you for watching VanLeeuwen Garage.